Hello and welcome to Conversations with Esther. Thank you for joining us. Request that we pray. Then we begin. Father, we thank you for this session. We pray that you will lead us and guide us in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Let's go to the chat. Let's engage. Go to the chat and say, how are you feeling today? In one word, how are you feeling today? In just one word, how are you feeling? I'm checking on the chat. Oh, good. Dionysia says relaxed. That's beautiful. I'm waiting for the others. How are we doing? How are you feeling? I know today in Kenya is a holiday. Blessed, Jacinta. Excellent. For the Kenyans, it's a holiday. I'm waiting for the rest. How are you feeling? In just one word. Dionysia is relaxed. Jacinta is blessed. Broken Empath, how are you feeling? Celestine, how are you feeling? There's Global Nokia, there's Jay, there's Mary. How are you feeling? Today as we will wait, keep putting your comments there. How you're feeling as I introduce our session today. I've seen another one, I will read that. Allow me to share my screen on that as we do an intro of this session of Conversations with Esther. Good. So good. On your screen is something that I love to have near me every time, a stress ball. A stress ball. And that helps me work. As I work, the stresses can get too high. I know, Christina, you will love that. But it's good to have a stress ball near you. Conversations with Esther is an impact-driven professional platform that transforms your view on matters mental health, human resource, legal, and your holistic wellness. We ignite ethical and authentic leadership while promoting best practice within industries. Conversations with Esther equips you and the workplace with relevant legal, human resource, and holistic wellness skills through corporate training, motivational talks, end-to-end human resource consultancy support, and career mentorship programs. Guided by our three values: integrity, excellence, and impact, Conversations with Esther envisions a workplace transformed by professional conversations, respectable relationships, and intentional leadership. Today, we have a guest, a friend of mine, and I call Christina. I know this is new to her, a destiny helper. Christina connected me to the American institution where we are both certified mental health coaches. So thank you, Christina. They say it is good to correct people in private, but recognize them and thank them in public. So thank you, Christina. Supporting caregivers is not just a people issue. It is a productivity, retention, and leadership issue. The future of work belongs to organizations that understand that caring for employees beyond their job descriptions strengthens both people and performance. So our topic tonight is maintaining productivity while supporting caregivers. Allow me to introduce our speaker, Christina. Christina, asante sana for supporting me and even connecting me. And you might not even be remembering that, but I am now a certified mental health coach because you connected me to the American Association of Christian Counselors. So Christina Waire is the founder of TC3 Africa. She is a strategic change and operational excellence consultant, executive well-being coach, strategic HR consultant, and caregiver advocate dedicated to helping leaders and organizations drive transformation, strengthen people's strategies, and foster sustainable well-being. She has over 25 years of multi-industry senior leadership experience, spanning strategy, change leadership, human resource governance, and process and quality systems improvement in the energy, hospitality, security, printing, manufacturing, and health sectors. She's an advocate for leader well-being and family caregiver support within the workplace, helping organizations address emerging leadership and workforce realities to strengthen effectiveness. Now, Christina is a certified mental health coach and a workplace well-being coach and UN accredited international chaplain. Karibu sana, Christina. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you so much. Indeed, I had forgotten about the American Association of Christian Counselors. It's such a privilege to be here this evening, and I'm excited to be discussing this topic with you. So maybe
is it my network or is it Christian? Vicente, let me ask you or anyone else on the call. Is it mine or Christina? Yes, Christina looks like her.
okay. Maybe I think just give me a second. I also put data as a backup because I don't know why the Wi-Fi fluctuated.
Okay, that's cool.
Okay, yes. So I was saying that the reason I'm passionate about leader well-being and about family caregiving is because of lived experience. I suffered burnout in the C-suite and I didn't know until I was processing my journey as a caregiver and the burnout that came with caregiving. So I have also been a primary caregiver for my mom when she got a stroke and moved in to live with me. And then after a number of years, I became a distance caregiver. Time doesn't allow us to talk about the different categories of caregiving, but just to say that research has found that distance caregivers sometimes suffer as much stress around caregiving as the primary caregiver. And for many of you around this virtual table, you might actually be both co-resident caregivers, and you may also be distance caregivers because maybe in the evening you're at home with your family member who you're supporting, and then during the daytime, maybe you're in school, you're in college, you're at work, so you find yourself straddling both functions. It's a real privilege to be here, and I'm excited to be having this conversation with you. Let me just share my screen. I'll use a little bit of PowerPoint, and then I'll switch off from the PowerPoint to just talking, because sometimes what I want is that I want this to be helpful for you as participants. I don't want it to be an academic kind of exercise for you, but I want it to be helpful for you as participants. So sometimes I find that disconnecting the screen helps people to just sort of listen deeply and internalize what they're seeing. So we're talking about maintaining productivity while supporting caregivers, and it's such a loaded topic. And at first, when Esther asked me to talk about it, I was like, actually, I wrote to her, whoosh. And then I thought, why not? Partly because, yes, I am an advocate for caregiving, and I feel that the corporate space needs to pay more attention to it. I have worked in the HR function at senior leadership level in different organizations, and with the benefit of now lived experience, I begin to see areas that could be addressed. But as Esther said in her introduction, it's not just a people issue. It's not an HR issue. It's a strategy issue. It's a leadership issue. And so before we go to how we maintain the productivity, I'll create a bit of context. I know that some of you may have attended the last three webinars, and you are quite well familiar with the things that were discussed. And some of you might not have attended the previous webinars. So I will be trying to join the dots so that I don't just dive into maintaining productivity, but giving the business case. I'll be giving the business case for why we are maintaining product, why we are addressing it at a workplace level. But I'll also be talking about the workplace broadly, and we'll see that in a minute. So why is this so important? We want to understand how caregiving responsibilities affect productivity and workplace, well-being and workplace performance. And as we'll see, when we're talking about work, we're not just talking about where you're employed, where you've got a payroll number, a SHA number, Anita, there's Anita deduction for you. No, we look at what exactly is the definition of work. So we're not talking about employment alone. And why is this so important? Because many people are silently balancing different aspects of caregiving, and many don't even know actually that they are caregivers. I've had sessions where people say, hi, I've just realized that I'm a caregiver. I just thought I was being a spouse, a parent, a daughter-in-law, a son-in-law, a grandparent, a grandchild, a sibling of somebody who's living with something, right? Or somebody will tell you, I didn't realize as the spouse of somebody living with alcoholism, I didn't realize that I'm a caregiver. I didn't realize that I'm a caregiver as the spouse or as a sibling of somebody living with addictions. So we need to appreciate that when we're looking at caregiving, it's not just physical, illness. It is also mental health conditions. It is also special needs. It is also addictions, whether it be substance use disorders like alcohol and drug addiction, or now increasingly we are seeing a lot of behavioral addictions, internet addiction disorder, gaming addiction disorder, over exercising, shopaholic, workaholism. There are many behavioral addictions, which are, some of them are emerging because we are not processing other stress as well. And so our coping mechanisms become these other things that give us dopamine highs. Okay, somebody there in the background is being very active. So according to WHO, by 2050, chronic diseases like cardiovascular diseases, cancer, diabetes, and respiratory illnesses will account for about 86% of the 90 million deaths per year. So this is a 90% increase in absolute numbers. And if we're going to have that kind of an increase in chronic diseases, in non-communicable diseases, and in communicable diseases, in pandemics we're more at risk of pandemics, then you can imagine how many more people will be in need of care. And the thing is, many caregivers are also in there. Being a caregiver does not exclude you from needing care. So many caregivers are also recipients of care. Communicable diseases, pandemics, mental health conditions, historical and emerging addictions are rising very significantly. And so this means that there will be so many caregivers in the workplace. And let me just maybe give a couple of statistics, and we'll look at a few more statistics as we go along. Did you know that mothers of children with autism record similar levels of the stress hormone cortisol as soldiers who are in combat? Mothers of children with autism record similar levels of the stress hormone cortisol as soldiers in combat in the Ukraine, in DRC, in Iran, in Gaza, in Sudan, in South Sudan. That is the level of stress that mothers of children with autism record. Now think about the increase in autism, even just alone in our country, and how many more children we are finding are developing autism. And for a number of them, it's because of the increase in screen time. And so it's creating developmental autism. I have a friend who's a pediatric doctor, and one time we were at some function and she introduced herself and she said she's an autism doctor. And so people are like, what's that? And she's decided to stop saying she's a pediatrician because 98% of the cases she's handling now as a pediatrician are related to autism. And many of them is because of the exposure to screen time, not all, but many. And with that is also then the addiction that children are developing to screens, the digital addiction at a young age. So people are becoming caregivers without even recognizing. Caregivers of patients with advanced cancer have decreased quality of life, increased anxiety, and increased depression. Okay, and I'm sure you talked about some of the signs of, some of the impacts of caregiving when we're not equipped how to manage our caregiving responsibilities or our caregiving journey. On average, couples with a child on the autism spectrum disorder have higher risks of divorce and lower satisfaction with their marriages when compared to couples of atypically developing children. So you begin to see what then this has how certain situations that family caregivers are dealing with spiral. And so you've got an employee, you've got a team member, you've got a volunteer, and they are caregiving, and then they're at a higher risk of divorce. People walk out of their marriage, conflict arises, and family communication and conflict is a whole topic by itself within the caregiving journey. Families where there's a parental substance use disorder, where the parent has got a substance use disorder, those families are characterized often by an environment of secrecy, loss, conflict, violence, abuse, emotional chaos, role reversal, where the children start parenting the parent, instead of the other way around, and fear. And then these children grow up and they come into the workplace. They don't even know that they're caregivers. I was reading some research. We don't have a lot of local research, but I was reading some research about the US as I was preparing. And more recent research has found that the majority of caregivers in the US, 1 in every 4 people in the US will be a caregiver. And then they say 75% of caregivers in the US are women. And the majority of caregivers are young people between the ages of 18 and 35. Between the ages of 18. Sorry, Esther?
Were you moving your slides? Because we're still
not yet.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I'm just still giving the introduction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Young people in the US between 18 and 35 form the majority of caregivers. So maybe, I don't know what our context is in Kenya, but you can imagine if we've got some 18 to 35 is Gen Z and Gen Alpha in the workplace, and we are assuming that they're just being their generation when we see certain things happening. But a number of young people are caregivers. There's really a lot of hidden work in the caregiver space. So why is it then, you can then begin to see why it is important that we look at productivity. Even as we're saying, how do we sustain productivity, we need to understand what is productivity, all right? And then we'll go ahead and we'll look at work. So productivity is not about being constantly busy. You've had this phrase that you can, yeah, that busyness is not necessarily productivity, right? And exhausted people cannot consistently perform at their best. And so it is important for workplaces to consider interventions that will support their staff and that will, be able to sustain productivity at the individual level and, of course, at the organizational level. I do acknowledge that it's a fine balancing act, especially for those of you who are in HR, in finance, and you're trying to balance between, so how much support can we give and yet still keep the business profitable? But I guess, like with all things, you do the best that you can, and then you rest knowing that you've done the best that you can. You might not be able to do everything, but exhausted people cannot consistently perform at their best. And so I want us to look at what exactly, when we say workplace, what are we talking about? And I think we start with the fundamental definition about work being any activity involving mental or physical effort directed towards a purpose or result. Any activity involving mental or physical effort directed towards a purpose or a result. So what does this mean? That when we are talking about sustainable, sustainable about productivity and vis-a-vis caregiver support, we need to understand that we're not talking, like I said, about where you are employed, because caregiving is a lot of work. You know the phrase, relationships take work, parenting takes work. So, when we're looking at work, we need to look beyond just where you've got a payroll number, all right, or where you run a business, but to look at work within the broad context that any activity involving mental or physical effort directed towards a purpose or result. So when we look at a workplace, in terms of productivity at the workplace, we are looking at how efficiently employees convert resources like time, effort, and technology into valuable output. So basically, within the workplace context, we're looking at effectiveness. How effective are you doing things? Are you doing the right thing to achieve your organization goals? I should have said organization rather than business. But yeah, business, enterprise, I think they can be synonyms. So you're balancing effectiveness, doing the right thing, and efficiency, doing things right. So that's what, when we're looking at productivity in very basic terms in the workplace. What about in the family? Because we're talking about family caregivers and relationships at work. So in the family, it's about the use of time, energy, communication, presence, to nurture the emotional bonds within the family, to manage household responsibilities, to support family members' personal growth. That is productivity, and that gets affected in their caregiving journey a lot. Because caregiving is so intense that sometimes we start operating only on tasks. Has the baby been fed, or has the person who's unwell been fed? Have they been changed? Have they been turned? Has the blood pressure been taken? Have we checked for bed sores? Have they done the physio? Have they done the occupational therapy? Those kinds of things. Are they safe? Did they sleep? Did they fall? Until relationships get lost in the process. So how do you maintain productivity in family as a caregiver? And then as a family caregiver, your ability then to balance the unpaid caregiving duties with your household management, your paid employment, maybe you're a business person, you're a farmer, without compromising your personal well-being. So that as the family caregiver, you're looking at it both from the workplace, from the family, and yourself. And so, I just thought it's important for us to look at work, not just as pay slip, but to understand that caregiving is a lot of work. And some quick statistics again, because what I'm doing here is why should organizations actually invest? They would ask, why should we be investing? Why should we spend time handling these things, doing employee assistance programs around caregiving? This research was done in the European Union, and you can see the differences in lifestyle quality of life between non-caregivers and unemployed caregivers. So you can see that non-caregivers, 22% in this particular survey recorded that they were in fair or bad health. Fair is not good. Fair is not good health, all right? But unemployed, 41% unemployed caregivers said that they were in fair or bad health. Employed caregivers, 27%. So you can begin to see that there's a shift in the statistics. You begin to see that this research shows the toll on of caregiving on people. And hey, we care for people. We are caregivers many times. We are caregivers for people who we love. So it doesn't mean that people are whining, they're complaining. No, the research is just stating the facts. You can love somebody very much, but the toll of caring for them is heavy on you. And that's one of the things that causes a lot of mental distress for caregivers. That paradox that you love somebody very much, but the toll of taking care of them is burning you out. Of course, there are those people who find themselves as caregivers in situations that are not very loving, where maybe somebody walked out. We see this in the media. Somebody walked out in 1962, and then they appeared back in the village last year when they are sick and they're dying, or they went and they got another wife, another husband, things didn't work out, then they come back to the first one to take care of them. So there are situations where the caregiving is not necessarily in a happy relationship. 38% of non-caregivers in the European Union struggle to make ends meet. Employed caregivers, 44% of employed caregivers struggle to make ends meet. Loneliness is higher in caregivers. Social exclusion is higher in caregivers. Life satisfaction is lower in caregivers. This is what research says. And you can begin to see how this may affect people in their different workspaces. In the US, primary caregivers spend 13 days on average on instrumental activities of daily living, like shopping, food preparation, housekeeping, laundry, etc., and 6 days per month on feeding, dressing, grooming, what are called activities of daily living, dressing, grooming, walking, bathing, toilet assistance. That's what primary caregivers do. And another 13 hours per month. So this was days, the first two. And then 13 hours per month researching on care services, talking to Dr. Google, ChatGPT, I don't know who else, doing research, okay? That means that this comes to literally, that's what, 13 plus 6 is 19 days. Another 13 hours, that's 20 days. Actually, maybe around 21 days. And 21 days per month. And how many days a month do most people work? Employed people, 20 days a month. So many primary caregivers in the US, it's like holding down 2 full-time jobs. And I'm sure if we had solid research in Kenya, we would find the same thing, that many primary caregivers are doing 2 full-time jobs because caregiving is full-time work. And then you're going to work elsewhere, or you're going to work, you're running a business, you're employed by somebody, you're working online. So caregiving by itself is a full-time job for primary caregivers. And so if you've got a team member who's a primary caregiver, you begin to realize why they are always exhausted, they are tired, they are, all of those things. You cannot just say, sort out your family issues. Can't you see so and so is coping better? People are wired differently, and also some people are highly functional. Some people actually become workaholics the more they're under stress. So workaholism becomes their coping mechanism. Some people look very strong until the day they just snap, and you wonder, Auntie Christina did what? She jumped from KICC and then she looked like she was always so put together, all right? Then 46% of caregivers in the US have to provide complex chronic care, also do medical and nursing tasks and so on. But regardless of the employment status, positive activities in caregivers' lives in the US reduces by 27.2% because of caregiving responsibilities. Now, this caregiver is your front office assistant, is your receptionist, is your PA, is your customer service executive at the call center, and they're always supposed to be smiling and say, hello, this is TC3 Africa, how may I help you? And sometimes they get an earful, they get commotion, they get confusion, they get nasty people, they get difficult people, but they're always supposed to be smiling. And they're in a state where the positive aspects in their lives have reduced by 27%. How does that employee cope? How does that employee cope? And it's important for us to understand these things, that we understand it's not just a pep talk that will help the employee um, um, to start being productive. Okay, it's not just a pep talk. It's not just a come on. Many people are caregivers, or hey, you ni life, see ni life. Those kinds of things can't help people. It's not an annual webinar that you give to the staff once a year and that it will carry them through, because caregiving is really complex. Let me forget about the Canadian statistics and look at what about Kenya? Sadly, we don't have much research on in Kenya. There are some papers you'll find. So, and I'm sure you had this in the other webinars. It's often called the caregiver burden. So you'll find like maybe some people who are doing psychology have done some research on the caregiver burden, but it's not as comprehensive and as in-depth as what you find like for the US, for Japan, and for Europe. So Kenya does have a gap, but I am very sure we can identify with those statistics that I've shared. I'm very sure that for many of us around this table, they resonate. And so, for a number of us, this is what, for those of us who are caregivers, and for those of us who are not caregivers, but we are in positions of leadership, this is possibly what many caregivers feel like. They are moving, but they just don't know how they are moving. They have carried zigos like, and so we do need to pay particular attention to caregivers. And well done, Esther, for organizing this series. So we want to look at the impact of caregiving on the workplace. And let me just talk about the dual role dilemma, but I'll break it down a bit more. And because for many caregivers is that they are holding, they're employed, they're running a business, they're employed. So whether they're self-employed or employed by somebody else, and they are also primary caregivers. Some may be distance caregivers, and so on. But many caregivers have got a dual role, and that presents a lot of dilemmas. And so in the workplace, you'll often find that this results in absenteeism or presenteeism. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. I want to stop sharing my screen there. I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along. Just give me 1 second there. Okay, so when we're looking at that's the dual role within the workplace. Within the family setting, the home setting, we're looking at productivity with regards to your ability to coordinate, to manage the schedules, to attend to doctor's visits, to facilitate communication with medical professionals. And that is quite a hectic kind of thing to do. We're looking at the instrumental activities of daily living, what I shared about the statistics that are found in the US, that primary caregivers spend 13 days a month doing instrumental activities of daily living, and then the 6 days a month doing the activities of daily living, and then all the research and everything. So your ability then to do that gets impacted by caregiving, because it is stressful and it is strenuous. It is demanding. And so as we are looking at the whole question of how do we look at how do we sustain productivity as we are supporting caregivers, we then need to tailor it. We need to understand the issues that caregivers are dealing with, so that we can then understand what works and what doesn't work. What can we do that will mitigate? It is unlikely that we'll be able to resolve every situation, because the diversity of caregiving situations is so broad. And so I know you must have discussed this, and that's why I've sort of switched off the screen, but just think about the impact of family caregiving on the person. the fatigue, the difficulty sleeping. Burnout arrives with all of its relatives. Yeah, it arrives with its siblings, its parents, its in-laws, its fifth cousin removed, its great aunties. That's what burnout does. It arrives like that. And so there's the fatigue, there's the difficulty sleeping, there's the experiencing changes in appetite. You could be overeating or undereating, right? There's the frequent colds, flus, headaches, and muscle pain. And many caregivers, as I said when we started, don't know that they're even caregivers. They just think, I'm in a relationship with this person. I'm their parent, I'm their spouse, I'm their grandparent, I'm their sibling, I'm their son, I'm their daughter. They don't recognize that actually they are a family caregiver. And so all the more need for us to have more awareness programs so that people know. But then you'll have employees who are having these panapale symptoms, and they're always the flu all the time, the headache, the muscle pains, and we might think that they're just being shifty. But because they don't know what they're going through, or sometimes they know, but because they stigma, the stigma with having a family member living with certain diseases, the stigma with having a family member living with certain mental health conditions, the stigma with having a family member living with certain addictions. They might not disclose to you as the line manager or even to HR, right? So, the chronic inflammatory diseases, the autoimmune conditions, and so on, the emotional things, the loss of motivation, the reduced sense of accomplishment, the being dissatisfied, the checking out of meetings, and the person is at work, but they've checked out of meetings. Or nowadays, they're always complaining. And everything is about the employer this, the employer that, but they themselves might not even know that actually that is not the real underlying issue. They just have we become demotivated. We start feeling, a lot of dissatisfaction. Nothing is good. We're irritable. We are persistently sad. We are no longer interested in our work and what we used to do. We feel worthless. Um, um, you know, um, many emotional things, sleeplessness, panic disorders, and so on. And then the behavioral, we begin to disengage from people. We begin to disengage from our work, the brain fog and the forgetfulness, the decision fatigue, the absenteeism and the presenteeism, the maladaptive coping, like I've said, we develop other behavioral addictions to try and cope. The dissatisfaction with work, we become dissatisfied with work, yeah? We begin to neglect our self-care. And in some cases, we become workaholics. So we begin to work longer hours or with more intensity to take on much more because that becomes our coping mechanism. And so these things then have got an effect on the these things then have got an effect on the of course on the workplace. So okay, let me just continue. I was trying to find where to slide share again, but I seem to have lost it. And all right, so let me just talk about the ripple effect. So with all those kinds of impacts of caregiving on a person, it's then now easy to see why you'll find increased physical and mental health situations in the workplace. You'll find drops in performance. You'll find high functionality. That's where somebody, like highly functional alcoholic, somebody living with alcohol addiction who can take, I don't know, 3 crates of beer and they say, usijali gari tajua njiani, to know how to get home. And the car indeed does get home, until their liver starts talking because they've developed liver cirrhosis. So high functionality is where you are burnt out, but you show increased capacity for work. And the risk is that at the workplace, we are likely to say, see, you be like Christina. Even her, she's a caregiver. You can't say that she's working even more. She's delivering even more high functionality. Increased medical expenses, lost productivity, increased errors because of the brain fog, the decision fatigue, the detachment, increased errors and the increased cost of errors to the business, increased lateness and absenteeism, higher presenteeism, where the spirit is, the body is there, but the spirit is absent. So you've got the person, but they're not with you, okay? And presenteeism can be more damaging than even absenteeism. Employees who refuse to take growth opportunities, they cannot work on project teams, they cannot do extra hours when it's needed, they can't travel, even if it's for training or for assignments, they can't go on secondment elsewhere. They're reluctant to do so. Of course, there are those who will take them up to numb and escape maybe the caregiving stress. The loss of talent, because you may have the person present, but they are not present, or their performance drops so hard you have to fire them, or they quit. They quit because they need to balance life. Then the negative team dynamics, and team here I also include family, because for, like we've said, caregiving is a full-time job, all right? So negative team dynamics, because the employee is detached, the employees are physically present but mentally absent, the employee is sometimes absent, the employee is making errors, they don't want to be part of the team, they are having fits of rage. So that negative dynamics, right? So increased conflict in the workplace. So what can we do to sustain our productivity in that context? Because if we don't understand that context, we cannot sustain productivity. We cannot maintain productivity even as we support employees, even as we support family members. If we don't understand why the primary caregiver, you could be the primary caregiver and you could be full-time caregiving at home, and maybe your spouse is working and they might not be understanding, but why do you're getting so upset nowadays? You're ill-tempered, you're forgetting things, even things that are necessary maybe for the person who you're taking care of or for yourself. It's important to understand that context. And I'm saying that because I recognize we could be in the group, could be people who are full-time caregivers, and then those who are both full-time and working caregivers. And then there could be those who are not caregivers, but are interested in understanding how to support. So one of the key things is to help build productivity is to get equipped. And like I said, once a year webinar will not do. A couple of posts, e-shots to employees will not do. Caregiving is very complex and it requires like intense equipping for caregivers. And part of that also includes just creating awareness. Because if you say we are only going to, sometimes some companies do caregiver programs, but they target the people who they know are maybe, let's say, children, are parents of children with special needs. I've had programs in organizations for parents of children with special needs. But then we don't recognize that there are many other people who are caregivers. If you followed The Nation last month, there was a series on betting, gambling, and all the gambling that people are now doing with their phones, and also talking about some of the articles and people being interviewed were around when your family member is addicted to sports betting, what that does, the stigma, the loss of relationship, the loss of finances, the stealing and selling things to sustain their habit, So some people might not even have been aware that they're caregivers. And so there's need to have general caregiver awareness sessions, literally starting from the top, because the top sets the tone. And the people at the top need to recognize that even them, they are caregivers, many are. And even if they are not, they need to understand, because if the top understands and appreciates what caregiving does for the workplace, then they're the ones who will drive strategic intervention. They're the ones who will approve things. They're the ones who will resource things, provide the budgets, and all the other approvals that are needed for effective interventions to be carried out. So get equipped, run programs, right from everybody. Let line managers be aware what caregiving means. It's not an HR issue. It's not a go send that person to Esther, go send that person to Jay. No, that's not what it is. The line managers need to understand caregiving dynamics and impact so that they can support team members better but they also too may be in need of care. And the more senior people get, the harder it is to create a safe space. I mean, how does the CEO start talking with other people about maybe the spouse who is living with a complex mental health disorder? So create safe spaces for senior leadership to have their own programs as well, until the organization has created a culture where it is open. And speaking of culture, therefore, for us to sustain productivity, we must make caregiving and caregiving interventions part of the culture, not an event, not a warm, fuzzy thing that HR does for those woye people who are in a woye situation. No, because the reality is that the majority of people, as Rosalind Carter, she was the late Jimmy Carter's wife, and she started a caregiver institute called the Rosalind Carter Institute. She says there are only 4 people in life: those who will receive care at one point in their lives, those who will give care. Okay, now I've forgotten. Anyway, so all of us, one way or another, are affected by caregiving. Okay, so equip line managers as best as possible, individualize care support. Each person is unique. Esther and I could be taking care of somebody living with dementia, but first of all, our personalities are different. Our coping levels are different. Um, the kind of dementia that the person we are taking care of may be different. you know our financial situations may be different, our family situations may be different. Maybe she's got a stronger support system than I do. I mean, our backgrounds are different, so I may be having more fractures in my life than she has, and that's why I may snap faster. And so it's important as best as possible to have individualized care support, which is where then equipping the line managers come, because those are the people who should be able to know how things are going and how maybe to structure things. Look at policies that can work, dedicated leave policies. If it's possible to have family medical leave, where caregivers can get extra days because they need to keep going to the hospital. They need to, sometimes they are kaput, they are totally fatigued. Do the medical policies cater for things around caregiving? Um, can wheelchairs be bought under the medical cover? Can assistive devices be bought under the medical cover? If your organization is one that has got school fees policy, would that include special needs schools? Can there be flexible work as best as possible? Of course, some settings can't allow flexible work. I mean, if you're a nurse in the ICU, you can't say you'll do it from the house, So, but as best as possible, can there be flexible work? So maybe that nurse could be put on straight shift rather than working different shifts all the time. What about shared work, where if as a caregiver, I'm starting to burn out and I'm in full-time employment, is it possible to have a conversation where instead of having me as one employee who's underperforming, I start working part-time and the job is split between 2 people? So I get a pay cut, a new contract, but it becomes a win-win situation because I don't lose my job entirely. All right. Again, demystify and destigmatize illness, conditions, and addictions. Do research, understand your workplace, your employee statistics with more depth. All right. So that then, even as you're tailoring solutions, you're able to tailor them to your workforce. And many of your staff a certain age? Are many of them taking care of aging parents? Are many of them taking care of people living with addictions? What are the statistics? So that even when you're doing programs, it's not just stress management. It's not just caregiver burnout. You're able to tailor it to the realities. How many of our employees might be in caregivers, but also they are living with addiction, internet addiction, gaming addiction, sports betting, pornography, all of those things. How many people are in that state? So the awareness that we destigmatize and people can put up their hands and self-disclose. Programs around personal finance management that are tied to caregiving. caregiving is so expensive. Illnesses and addictions are so expensive. And so, what about personal finance management that speaks not just to how you will retire, how to invest in money market, but that speaks to the psychology of the challenges of making lifestyle adjustments. I mean, I had to make major lifestyle adjustments when I was a caregiver. And I resigned from my work because I was so stressed, I was burnt out, and I felt I was being harassed. And I said, you know what? Let me just stay at home and take care of my mom. So I kept withdrawing my savings, and that's what we lived on for the longest time. And when the savings ran out, I had to make serious lifestyle adjustments, and it wasn't easy. So helping employees to process, those lifestyle adjustments, those struggles with taking care of maybe a spouse, and now maybe I have to adjust my child's schooling. I'm not complaining, but it's hard. Or I'm taking care of a parent, and I've got a child. And some people are taking care of an aging parent and also a child with special needs, and then struggling. How do I decide how to stretch this money of mine? So tailored personal finance management programs. Why? Because a stressed employee cannot be productive. All right. So keeping to assess the situations. If you're a caregiver, keep assessing your situations and making strategic choices for your life, recognizing that things have shifted. You don't have to struggle to be superwoman or superman. Just let go of some things. Some of the changes might be small, but they're significant. Maybe dropping certain activities, making lifestyle adjustments, getting therapy. And then a big factor, I think, is around self care. And self care is only effective when people have understood the depths of caregiving. And like I said many times, for us caregivers, we just know we are stressed, but we don't know what is wrong. We are struggling with caregiver guilt, which is a whole thing around the brain, psychology, We are struggling with resentment, we are struggling with stress, with burnout, with very many things. But we don't know. So we think we are losing our heads. And in fact, many caregivers get suicide ideation, right? So self-care is a huge thing that organizations need to encourage employees, equip them to understand the depths of caregiving and therefore to understand the depths of self-care, that it is not a day at the spa. It is not 3 days compassionate leave. It is not going to sit under a tree at Mombasa, enjoying a madafu and then coming back, that it is complex. It requires in some cases rewiring the brain. It requires therapy, it requires a lot of depth of help. And so for organizations to sustain productivity, equipping employees on caregiving, creating an organizational culture that supports caregiving, that understands caregiving, and being strategic, recognizing that the way the world is going, the levels of anxiety, the levels of addictions, the levels of commotion and confusion, many more, and then, the new diseases and so on, many more people will be in need of care and many more people will be caregivers. So as we take care of the employees who need care, we also need to take care of the employees who are caregivers and those who are both. So strategic intervention, I've said self-care, awareness, strategic intervention, those are really key things to be able to sustain. And where an organization is able to have support groups, have caregiver support groups within the workplace, employee support groups, employee resource groups that are able to empower employees and to give them tailored support. Push your insurers to have links with external support groups so that you can also refer your employees to groups. I think we are coming to the end. And so I think what I would say is that as we end this brief session, it is a loaded topic, but as we end this session is that, for those of us who are employers, and some of us also, we have got paid caregivers in our houses, right? We've got nurses, we've got people who are helping us to take care of our family members who need care. We need to remember that they too burn out. And any caregiver who burns out, whether it's you, the person, you, the family member, or whether it's somebody who you have paid, any caregiver who burns out is at great risk of abuse. Abusing the person who they are caring for. It's a great risk. Burnout is a great about how do you equip. Remember, we talked about work productivity in the workplace. It's easy to think within the corporate, but our homes are also workplaces. So productivity, even with our employees in the houses, how do we make sure that it is sustainable, that they can care in a loving way? Think about that. Think about policies. What support gaps exist? What small improvements can you implement immediately before you make that complex proposal to the group CEO or to HR? What small improvements could you improve immediately? And for those of us who are caregivers, ask yourself, what support do I need most right now? What am I carrying along that is affecting me, is affecting my ability to be productive, is putting therefore my job at risk? Where can I reduce unnecessary pressure? I will stop there because it's a topic that we could continue on for days, a whole retreat, and hand the meeting back over to Esther. Thank you.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you, Christina. That is powerful, that's helpful, that's impactful. I think we have 15 in the room, and I know it's 8:05. Anyone with a comment or question? We can give you a minute, you can unmute. It's an engaging conversation. Anyone on the call that would like to give a comment or ask a question or add? And as we do that, I know Christina was looking for that quote. 4 kinds of people: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need a caregiver. So you either have been a caregiver, you're currently a caregiver, you will be a caregiver, or you will need a caregiver. Thank you, Dionysia. That was a very insightful topic. I have been a caregiver and it was very draining. I confirm that I am one currently. And it's not easy. It's not easy. Nobody should lie to you. It's not easy. It takes your mental, physical, emotional, psychological strength. But I always say it's worth it. It's worth it. Yeah. Because you will either need a caregiver. And someone once said, Christina, someone made a comment one time and said, when you see someone on a wheelchair, look at them again and again. We are candidates at some point. There will come a time when your feet cannot carry you up the stairs because of age. Doesn't have to be sickness, can be age. So it's just good to support people. Good. Anyone else with a comment or question? You feel free to unmute. Celestine, Jen Gitawa J, I see you there. Jacinta, Linda, I see my very good friend Rosemary, Tiffin, yeah, I see you there. Anyone with something to say before we come to a close? Seems no one. Thank you very much, Christina. That was a very good session. We will upload this on our YouTube in a few minutes. So feel free to visit our YouTube, Conversations with Esther Katiba. Conversations with Esther Katiba. That's our YouTube channel. Let's also talk on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn as Esther Katiba. for further conversations. We do give talks to organizations on mental health as well. Someone was speaking, and I know Christina, where do we find you on social media? You can tell us that as we come to a close.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you again for